Did you know that Google personalizes many searches by city and Also Asked is the only tool to access live People Also Asked data at city level? Try for free at alsoasked.com.
Tired of SEO guesswork? Quadra's AI agent goes deeper to uncover high-impact optimizations and completes hours of SEO in minutes. Get started now.
I was going to say that SEO with Fat Joe is as peaceful as this, but then the birds are all having fights.
Well, lovely welcome. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm really excited to be here, and it feels like such a long day when you're on at the end, so I really appreciate everybody hanging around to listen to us today. So I'm going to talk to you about why optimising to I'm going to talk to you today about why optimising to click-through rate is damaging your performance, and I'm going to cover it through three main themes. First being why it is we tend to focus on these sorts of metrics, even though potentially kind of as marketers we know deep down that maybe these aren't the right ones to be optimising for our business. Number two, I'm going to talk to you why what opportunities you can find to identify why click-through rate and similar metrics aren't the most appropriate ones to drive your business objectives forward. And finally, to talk you through ways to try and get that buy-in from the business, because ultimately, even if we think we know what the challenge is and what we need to do to solve it, it takes more than just us to get that moving. So I'm going to start you by looking sort of back, so sort of 13, 15 years ago when I started in digital. And at that point in time, when we weren't equipped with all of the different sort of algorithms that we have today, actually driving traffic to websites and looking at things like click-through rates were quite important at that time because we didn't have access to a lot of the metrics and the wealth of data that we do today. And so during those times, as I said, we were very much focusing on driving traffic to the site in the hope that obviously the website would do its bit. But as we know now, that is not the way to look at it. As an audience ourselves, and when we think about what we're doing with brands, it's very much understanding what our intent is and what we're offering to our consumers in order to make sure we're maximising those engagement points. So I'm going to start off with, as a really off-putting, actually, I didn't realise how it's quite big when it's in the screen, kind of looking at you. But why is it we concentrate on the wrong metrics to start with? And we all love this word, our all-important KPIs, which actually quite often don't necessarily relate to the performance that we're looking to deliver for our business. So let's talk quickly about what the difference is between a metric and a KPI. So a metric is a quantifiable measure which can be used to track performance. So things like click-through rates, sessions, conversions are all metrics. A KPI, on the other hand, is a critical metric which aligns with the business's goals, and that's where the big difference sits. They very much speak to the business objectives that you're looking to achieve, and therefore they have a different role to play. So all KPIs are metrics, but not all metrics are KPIs. Take for a moment. Again, more animals. I've got a love for putting cute animals in. So click-through rate as a metric can provide insight to us. So I'm not suggesting that click-through rate is a metric that we don't need to consider at all. It's just about using it in the right place and at the right time to get the most out of it. So the reasons we do sort of typically use click-through rate is the fact that it does give us an indication of response to a piece of text, an image, or whatever we're putting in front of our consumers. So what it doesn't necessarily tell us, though, is if that's good or bad. Just because click-through rate has gone up or down doesn't necessarily mean, that's a good or bad response as we look in more detail. There's been a lot of other instances where click-through rate is a metric that we choose, some of which again being that we are able to compare these across different channels and across different platforms as well. So when we're trying to compare what's going on between our different marketing channels, click-through rate can be a metric that we can use because it appears on many of them. And finally, in terms of impacting cost and position, so there is obviously a consideration around the role of click-through rate, both in terms of rankings, but also in terms of how much people are paying if they're going through paid channels, essentially. But even if we kind of know that there are challenges around using click-through rate, it can be hard to get buy-in. And I think we've all been there when we're sort of, we know what we want to get across, but we're not necessarily finding it easy to do that. And things like default bias is a really good example of why we have some of these challenges. So humans are fundamentally more comfortable with what they have always done. So you're going to be up against something that's actually, this is the status quo, I'm quite happy with things as they are, like why is it you're trying to change this? And click-through rate did make sense when 20 years ago, when we were more limited in terms of the metrics that we had available to us. But fundamentally, that is a really big blocker that we're facing when we're trying to sort of shift that perception within our business. Expedience bias. So again, we take the easy path. And I think this is a really important one when we're looking at the types of scenarios where maybe we are starting to question, are these the right metrics we should be looking at? Have we really got KPIs that make sense? These are quite often high stress, high pressure situations where we're maybe not seeing the performance we're expecting. In those sorts of circumstances, we will see people trying to take the easiest path. And that will typically be what's easy to measure, and what's more sort of easy to access at that point in time. And it is really tough to change measurement frameworks and get buy-in because it can be quite a big job. But as I said, it depends on what timing you're choosing in order to sort of bring up that conversation, if you like, that then can have an impact on how likely it is you're going to get that buy-in. And if you think about experience bias, so we take our perception to be the truth. I think we all can probably sit there and think about that for a moment, about where we do that. Because ultimately, when we're using metrics, we don't do it because we think it's wrong, obviously. We don't do it because we're trying to be difficult. We're doing it because we think it makes sense, essentially. And it's sort of logical for us as individuals. And ultimately, if we don't think it's broken, we've seen performance off the back of what we've been doing. So, it's not broken. Why do we need to fix it? But I would argue that you have been seeing performance, but is it the best performance that you could be delivering? Because sort of underlying everything, click-through rate often is associated with performance. If we see click-through rate as a strong click-through rate, then we're going to see performance off the back of it. But then, in a world of zero-click searches, which I know will have been discussed at various points today, so just to remind anyone who's not familiar, a zero-click search is a search that results either in no onward search or an onward traffic to a website because you've obtained the information you require from the search results page, or it results in a secondary search to maybe answer a further question. But fundamentally, it doesn't drive traffic to a site. It doesn't instigate clicks through to a website. And in this world where we're seeing up to, say, 60% of searches are being zero-click searches, it begs the question, are clicks becoming an outdated metric? And actually, should we be focusing more on what our customers are doing when they're engaging with our brands on our sites? Because click-through rate doesn't actually align with our business objectives. And I don't think anybody here would say, as a business, my aim is to drive people to my website. No, your aim is to drive people to your website for them to complete an action, be that a conversion, be that filling in a form, a lead, purchase something. And it's quite easy for us to think, actually, if we drive that traffic through, that's the right thing to do. But we don't want window shoppers. We don't want people just passing by. We want people who are really invested in what we're trying to offer. So click-through rate just isn't a KPI because it doesn't paint the full picture of what's going on. It simply isn't able to do that. So therefore, if you're optimizing to click-through rate as a strong metric, you're not going to deliver the objectives that you need. So then if we think about kind of some examples of where this is the case so that I can prove the point to you in case you're still not sure. So higher ranking. So in terms of search time, if we think that it's got a higher click-through rate, it must mean that we're going to get a better ranking overall. Engagement also plays a role, as well as click-through rate in the ranking position. And actually, we should be evaluating the engagement that we're seeing off the back of those clicks coming to a site and any of the benchmarks, because obviously depending on where we're appearing on the search results page will impact that click-through rate as well. So again, if we're not necessarily considering it in the right context, it doesn't really mean a great deal. Greater relevance. So if we're seeing a good click-through rate, it must mean it's really relevant to the audience. I would argue that, is it that your listing is just too generic? Is it too, you're appealing to everybody and therefore you're technically appealing to nobody? You're attracting clicks from anyone who might be vaguely interested in your offering. Instead, look at testing or tailoring your ad copy to evaluate and evaluate those micro and macro conversion points. Because ultimately, again, you're not driving that traffic through just to be there on your site. You're driving them through to complete actions. Compare what's going on from a click-through rate perspective, but also those conversions. If we see clicks coming through, we're automatically going to get conversions. Again, you could be driving clicks to the site, but are they actually finding what they need when they come through? Are they relevant traffic? Consider your customer journeys. We've just heard about already how important customer journeys are to understand those blockers to that traffic coming through to site. And if we see a greater click-through rate, we assume that the quality of that traffic is going to be good. And again, we with the best will in the world, like whatever we're putting out in terms of delivering to our customers, we're trying to do the best thing we can. And so that assumption that, that's going to be delivering the best quality traffic, again, could be an easy sort of mistake to make. So you drive clicks that may convert, but if they're of no value or limited value to the business, then again, was it worth the time? Instead, review that click-through rate. Again, those micro and macro conversion points, such as your marketing qualified leads, your sale qualified leads, in order to understand actually is the quality there alongside the traffic. If you're seeing that click-through rate, again, you could assume your customer experience is really strong because, again, people are engaging with what you're providing them. But again, if your listing is too broad and appealing to anybody that's coming through to your landing page, then arguably it's not necessarily the strongest customer experience. And again, evaluating what that listing is showing them and what their search intent was to look at whether that actually represents what you're showing them on the landing page. And finally, one of my favourites is that kind of fluctuations in metrics. And I think this does happen quite a lot where we kind of panic. We're like, that's gone up, it's gone down, we don't know what's going on. Actually, metrics will fluctuate. Like we see that as the variation you'll see, it's never going to be static. There's going to be days where it goes up and down. But actually what you need to do is understand how beyond the norm that behaviour is in terms of the behaviour of your metrics. And actually assessing on a statistical basis to decide whether that change is of something of concern. So you're not wasting your time optimising something that actually isn't really a problem. So if we think about what a positive drop in click-through rate could look like, so some good examples we've got here is the first one, adding the price to the meta description or to your description. If you add the price, you might put people off clicking. That's true, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. If your product is more premium and therefore more expensive than your competitors, and you're okay with that because that's your intended strategy as a business, then it doesn't matter that you're showing that person that actually this price point maybe isn't relevant for you. You're putting those people off. What it means is the people that have seen that and are engaging, actually for them, that makes sense. That's something that they're potentially interested in. If you're personalising the copy that you're presenting to an audience based on the search intent and how you've categorised that, you're changing that appeal to a specific persona to look at how you're engaging with them. And ultimately, again, you're going to see that copy all of a sudden speaks to a specific but potentially smaller audience. But again, if that's what you're trying to reach, you're not trying to reach everybody, you're trying to reach your target audience. So therefore, you might see that fewer people are clicking, but that's not necessarily, again, a bad thing. And what we've seen, actually some good examples of where I've worked in the pharma industry, where we were using copy based on sort of smoking cessation and looking at whether if we put references to kind of financial savings that you could have if you chose to quit smoking, would have a positive effect on engagement. Actually, what we saw was that fewer people potentially clicked through because the copy was speaking specifically to a motivation of a specific group of people. However, the conversion rates that we're seeing off the back of that were much stronger. And we've got another example here. So we've got control and an experiment version of some text that we're putting in front of our audiences. The first example where we're looking at kind of being much more broad in terms of kind of helping a business and like some references to awards. The second experiment was around the quality and trust, again, which came in there, which in this instance, we saw a lower click-through rate coming through the experiment version and as compared to the control. So on this basis, you might think, okay, well, clearly the control is a preferred option. But actually what we see when we go through and looking at the other metrics from conversion rates, actually the conversion rate was much stronger with the experiment. And then the CPA actually followed suit to being much stronger when we were seeing that. So it really demonstrates the fact that just if you're optimizing purely to click-through rate alone, you're going to be missing the key insights, which is actually what the conversions were happening on site. And then increasing your visibility, again, will reach that larger audience. So if we improve the position on the visibility, on the certain keywords, that again is going to be a situation where you're potentially going to increase the volume of searches that are coming through, but your click-through rate may have reduced as a result. And I think this is, again, quite a challenge when we're looking at metrics where we potentially want the best of both worlds. It's like, well, we want this, we want something to increase, but at the same time, we want the other metric to increase at the same time. Like quite often, that's just not possible. And you could be wasting a lot of time arguing kind of how to get that when actually you need to focus on what's important, not necessarily these sorts of metrics. We've got some examples again here. So where we've seen click-through rate dropped, however, clicks have increased, but that was the intended strategy. So again, are we worried so much about click-through rate when actually the metrics that we're focusing on is something else? This is why click-through rate can't be a KPI, because it can't reliably inform action. Off the back of those, the click-through rate's changed, but you can't say, well, okay, the click-through rate's done that, therefore my action is this. It's not immediately obvious what that needs to be. And these problems don't just relate to click-through rate, by the way. I'm sure many people are sitting there thinking, oh yeah, this really resonates. Maybe not with that metric, but I've had this problem. And it doesn't just relate to search either. We see this challenge across a lot of different digital channels. But what's great is that you can apply the same principles across whatever channel you're on. So then if we think about how to change the business's approach essentially to measurement. So start with your business's objectives and the overall strategy that you're looking at. And I think regardless of where you are, that's always a healthy thing to do, to strip that back and say, look, what are we trying to achieve for the business for this coming year? Because it's really easy, again, if we're looking at it from a search perspective or any channel where we're just driving lots of traffic, like to leave our responsibility at the door. And then once again, it's reminding ourselves that, you know what, we're not just driving people to a site, we're driving people to perform an action that the business is requiring. Because ultimately, we're driving that engagement on site. So think about what success looks like how will you know your strategy has been a success? Think about your top 3 business indicators, because that's a really good place to start. You can then map your metrics that you against those 3 key indicators. So you can see, okay, well, these metrics that we can measure will relate to those objectives. And then of those metrics, which ones will be the ones that indicate progress towards your business's objective? And those are your key performance indicators. Once you've got those, you can then rebuild your measurement framework, assuming that you have one. And you can start to look at combining some metrics. So we've got like click-through rate, but this applies, conversion rate, engagement rate. We can combine these metrics to really understand what consumers are doing. So with click-through rate, using metrics such as active users, scroll depth, will really start to give us a little bit more context about what's going on. And by using this approach, you can start to answer questions like, are my clicks leading to meaningful engagement? And that's actually what we want to know. It's not whether they've driven clicks to the sites, whether it's actually meaningful engagement off the back. So the pairings like click-through rate, engagement rate, and unique scrolls will start to give you that picture. And they'll answer, do we have the right traffic coming to our site? And another one is, are people revisiting our site? Again, we're not necessarily, some businesses, it might be the case, you just want people in and out, and that's fine. But a lot of the time, you are looking for that re-engagement with them. And again, looking at different pairings to understand, what is that re-engagement? And are there opportunities to improve retention? So breaking this down, so we've got click-through rate. Is the user interested? As we said, that gives a little bit more insight into that. Then you break that down into the micro-event conversion count, which would be things like video plays, product details, search function, which I personally is a favourite of mine because it really gives you a bit more insight into how people are engaging with the site. And then things like scroll depth, have they engaged with the paid content that you're using? Obviously, this will depend on what the content is, but you get the idea. And that breaks it out into, is the user interested? And then what did they do when they went through? And then similarly, we've got a customer journey map again, because actually when we're looking at the different metrics, they should be relating to the different stages in that journey, essentially. So metrics cannot necessarily be something that you track through the whole journey. They're going to be different metrics that are relevant at different points. So we've got things like the homepage, like search bar use, for example. If you're looking at Inspire Me Hub, it could be time per session. You could look at PLP, that the next page pass would be interesting to examine. Basket page, like abandonment rate. Error rate on the form for your payment pages, sharing on socials for your thank you pages. These are completely different metrics that are going to come through, which will ultimately give you some indication of that engagement. And then when you're creating your measurement plan, which most people will obviously be comfortable with doing around the objectives, your KPIs, your metrics, but the main thing that I want to take away from this is understanding which platforms you're going to be reporting from, because which platform you're using, the nuance will be slightly different in terms of how those metrics report. And so it's really critical as a business, you're confident in agreeing which of those platforms that you're going to use as your source of truth. So we may still have some challenges to overcome, and reframing is a really good way to try and help that. And quite often we'll see, I've tried this loads of times, no one's listening to me. Try and reframe that information to them to try and get that buy-in. If you keep doing it the same way, you're not going to make any progress. So going back to what we talked at the start, so expedience bias, so help making the choice easy for them. Take some of that decision away and actually present it in a way that makes it something that's quite, easy for them to make that decision. So present the new alongside the old, and present the future costs. If they don't do this, what impact could this have on the business? Default bias, using test and learns, because again, they're used to what they're doing at the moment. Don't make it too hard for them to engage. So just create some tests and learns. Let's just give it a go and see how it works. Use social proof, look at case studies of where other businesses have done this approach. Again, to try and help that reassurance of, actually it's fine to move away from what we've always done. And experience bias. So what works well? Previous data, go back through your data and say, look, this is the reason why these metrics don't work, because if we'd continued to optimize in this way, if we'd done something differently, look what we could have achieved. And frame it as an evolution. Again, you're not telling somebody that this is wrong. You're telling them that actually, things have evolved and we're in a new sort of a search world at the moment. So let's embrace that and look at what we can be doing differently. And if ultimately, by taking this approach, you'll be able to ensure that your business is optimizing to the right KPIs and metrics to deliver the objectives that you need. So what should you be doing next? Firstly, start with your KPIs, review your business goals and your channel objectives to really ensure that you are measuring the right things and you're optimizing to the right metrics and KPIs. Build out the frameworks, detail out the metrics and KPIs that you're going to measure and why you're using them to measure it, because that's super important. If you're not doing that, there's no agreement or clarity on the purpose. And finally, consider the barriers to uptake. And I think quite often when we're trying to move something forward, this is often the big challenge. It's like, I've done all this work, but it's really hard. People aren't listening. I'm just going to give up. This is arguably the hardest part. But really take that time to understand the audience you're speaking to, what their barriers are, and how you can help them get through that. And then, could it be visuals? If it's a spreadsheet, whatever is their preferred medium. But really think about, okay, well, what do I need to change in order to actually help my message get across? So next time you're sat in a meeting and you're thinking, this isn't really going quite the way I wanted it to, and I'm not sure that these metrics and KPIs are the right ones we should be focusing on, maybe we should be doing something differently. Hopefully I've given you a good framework to work off in order to try and help you make that change in your business. Thank you so much. And do connect on LinkedIn.
Demand sphere. Limitless visual insights from the SERPs. Unlimited dashboards and users. Easy to use and easy to scale your growth to new levels.
Monthly reporting making you want to shove sharp things up your nose? Try Dragon Metrics, the all-in-one SEO software with mind-blowing reporting tools.